Hi everyone, I'm Leah Dergachev, founder of the Marcom Grind. We're a community where marketing and comms pros come together to connect, swap ideas, share wins and lessons, and support each other through the real behind the scenes work. I'm so excited to share this powerful conversation between Marine Zana, who runs our internal comms sub community, and special guest, Comms Jobs community founder, Daniel Mendez Erostica. In this session, they'll explore how internal communications pros can better position themselves strategically, especially in today's competitive job market. They're going to discuss how to build a clear and credible portfolio, how to showcase impact instead of just deliverables, and how to frame your work in a way that resonates with business leaders and hiring managers. If you've ever struggled to articulate your value beyond execution, this conversation is for you. I hope you find it just as insightful as I did. Enjoy!
Thank you so much for having me. I think this topic of how to demonstrate the value and the work that people bring to the internal communications function, it's so important because a lot of people struggle with it. So I'm super happy to discuss it, and I think it's going to be extremely helpful. A little bit about myself. So I'm originally from Chile. I started my career in corporate communications in the mining industry. And I also had a brief time as an HR business partner working in HR operations. So I have this perspective of doing the work in internal communications, corporate communications in general, but also have that perspective of the back end from an HR perspective and the hiring perspective. That was definitely a really interesting time of learning. And then in 2015, I decided to, with my family, to move to the US. And since being here, I've been in multiple companies and multiple industries. I've worked in the engineering and construction company. I've been in the oil and gas business and also biopharma and healthcare. I've lived in Arizona, in Virginia, in New Jersey, in Texas, and I've also been very lucky to see all different sides of the corporate communications function across industries and different parts of the world and in the US. Very happy to share my experience, especially seeing everything that's going on in the comms jobs world. Also excited to discuss a little bit of that as well.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. Yes, I think this session is going to be very interesting for obviously those who are looking for a job, but also for people who are not, but wants to know a little bit better about portfolio, how to be more strategic with how we sell ourselves, because I'm not sure it's something that we are used to do in comms. We are really good to do it for other people, but for ourselves, I find it's always a little bit challenging. So that's why I hope this conversation will be able to help or to give some insight about how to do. So the first topic that I would like to start with you is as a hiring manager, what you really want to see. So for instance, when you look at an internal communication portfolio, what are you really trying to understand about the candidate and what will make you think this person get it? This person can be a match.
So I think that the biggest misconception that people have when they're working on showcasing the work that they've done in internal communications is to focus in like the artifacts, right?
Yeah.
The newsletter, the whatever banner. And my perspective is that hiring managers in general are really not really into the pretty artifacts, right? Or like the design or how the materials read and look. They're really trying to understand how you think. Because that is really what you're looking for, right? As a hiring manager, you want to understand how this person will perform in the context of the job that they're applying for, right? So that is really what I would love to see, right? Or what I love to see when people are sharing their work is want to understand the context, like why
Yeah.
the work that you did mattered, right? Who was it for? How did you think about the deployment of the different communications for the different audiences, right? What was the most challenging audience to engage? Try to frame it in that way is really, to me, the most valuable part because especially these days, like you can really have all of that in your head. And then if you're going to use AI, for example, to execute, bring the deliverables, I honestly, also being a non-native English speaker, I know that grammar issues happen and design issues happen and in terms of the shape of it, like that happens and it can be solved, but the thinking behind it is what really matters, because it can be automated. It can be done by a machine. It can be replaced. So I think what you were saying, like, how do you realize when a person gets it? And it's when I can see that they're solving a business or a people problem, right? And they're not just
Yes.
focusing on pushing the message. And yeah, so I just think that it's very important for people to, when they're putting together their portfolio of examples and how they're going to be showcasing the work, is like they show their judgment, right? And how they're thinking about it strategically, and what you chose to say something, what you chose to not say something, and the why. And I think what is super important too is that when people bring into these examples the trade-offs, like what wrong,
Yeah.
what was difficult, what didn't really go as expected, right? What was not considered, right? So incorporate a little bit of an after action review in it. It's always super interesting as well, because it tells you that, or to the hiring manager, that you're also interested in really focusing on the how the results went, right? Like it was not just
Yes.
about deploying, but really about how it performed and if it helped you achieve the goal that you had or not.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I also think, and I include myself as well, that one of the biggest mistake we are doing when we try to create a portfolio is the lack of strategy. We are not giving, as you mentioned, all the context, all the specific task or execution we did, the result, and also we don't show enough our strategy, in my humble opinion. And for me, this was a trigger at the beginning. So that's why I would like to ask you for your point of view. What is the biggest mistake I see candidates make when presenting their work? Is it the strategy? Is it, as you said previously, lack of result, lack of context, a little bit of everything?
I think the biggest mistake is to not tell a story, you know,
Being a
because
storyteller.
yeah, a lot of times people think about a portfolio very literally. See, this is a
Yeah.
folder where I'm just gonna put my examples of my work. And in my opinion, like it has to be very easy for the receiver, for the hiring manager, the team that is going to review this, to understand what, like I shouldn't have to work to understand how these things fit in. And really when you pass, for example, a slide deck, right? Or just a single piece of an announcement or a report, doesn't tell you much. Like again, that
No.
is very focused on for and the shape, right? And how the actual material looked like, how it was written. But it doesn't tell you anything about what was that artifact supposed to do, why you came about that solution or that deployment. And that is really the biggest mistake, because people need to understand exactly, like from the very beginning, what is it? So if my thing is, if you're going to add just like a single slide deck, for example, or a single thing, you also need to add a little bit of context at the beginning. This
Yes.
material was designed to do this, and this was the situation. This is what we were trying to solve, so that when I'm reviewing or looking at it, like I understand, oh, okay, this is how it fit in, and this is the role that this communication was playing in an overall right plan. And when I've talked about
The
this,
big picture.
right, big picture. And again, the story. What is the story? You need to tell that story. It needs to be crystal clear. And when I've talked to some folks in this space about this, right, they're like, well, what about confidentiality? Because I'm all in internal communication. So it's very hard for me to tell about, for example, I don't know, a layoff
Yes.
or a reorg or a change management process in launching or retiring a platform, new benefits, whatever it is, right? And
Yes.
I always tell people, like, you need to understand that these folks that you're interviewing with, they're also in a company that very likely has policies around confidentiality and internal communications and how they're supposed to be internal only. So they will totally understand if you tell the story, redacting the name of the company, redacting sensitive data, and redacting any critical things that will be damaging to the company. So you have to be clear with that. And that's why a lot of times I recommend that even not doing that, it's also a mistake, because it tells
Yes.
you, it tells the hiring manager that you don't respect confidentiality agreements or things that you were not
No.
supposed to share externally, and then suddenly you're bringing it. So you have to be careful with that, right? Because that also speaks about how you work. So being very clear about, look, this was work that happened for a company, maybe in the industry and where it was located, and just tell the story in a way that you are not putting details of the company itself, but really focus on the work that you did. That's what the hiring manager wants. They don't want to know what happened with that company or like the juicy details or whatever went down. They want to know like what was your role and what you were doing. So I think those are two big mistakes. And the third one I think is that, again, it goes related a little bit to what I said before. If you do this, right, in terms of building a case study and telling the story, when you frame everything just extremely positive and like a success, because it's in Chile, we have this say that you don't step on, like superheroes don't step in on each other's capes.
Yeah.
So if you're talking to an internal communicator, right, they know that things are like they're never easy. They're always something that was forgotten, something that went wrong, or something that could have been better. So acknowledging that there was friction, that there was challenges, right? And how maybe this artifact that you're presenting help with that, it's always super important as well.
Yes, what you say about sharing your story really hits a bell in my mind because a few months ago, when I was looking for a job, HR asked me to share my portfolio example of what I did for HR for a specific question. At this time, I didn't have portfolio because for me it was for sales or marketing and also because the confidentiality box. So I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say nothing to HR, but I really didn't know how I could translate my work without having example, like piece of example. So like you say, I just share the story. I took one initiative I did with HR. I explained the context, the story, what I needed to do, the result, and I just sent that. And it's exactly what you said. They were completely fine with that. It give them a global picture about how I handle topics with different stakeholders and how I'm thinking, how in my mind I organize my idea, the result, etc. So I also think that this also show the strategy that you think strategically. So I want to ask you, talking about strategy, how do you spot the difference between someone just executes communication versus someone who thinks strategically? Is it because this person will explain everything with a tangible result, or someone who will be brief but very impactful? What do you think about it?
So I think that people that think more strategically are always going to talk about decision making, and again are going to really focus on the bigger picture and how everything was planned, and bring that very important part of what is the business problem that you were trying to solve, right?
Yeah,
Someone that it's more focused on execution is always going to focus and talk about deliverables only, right?
yeah, that's true.
And normally it's going to leave out that super important part about decisions, right? I posted the other day about that. Most communication problems are really decision problems, decision making
Yeah,
problems. And I feel like that is exactly when someone is more seasoned and experienced will talk about that and really talk about why you decided to do something. Like really focus on this is why we decided to go this way about it.
yeah,
That is super important. And in the way that they do that, they really articulate that tension, the risk, and the intent, right, of how you're deploying communications. And also, I think a big portion of what happens when people are putting together the portfolios and can make a difference on being more strategic versus just
yeah.
execution is the way that you talk about engagement metrics, just in general. When you're building a case study and you're bringing a story, right? Normally you need to at data and proof points, right? And I feel like there's a difference, right? When someone is just focusing on open rates, click-through metrics, or hits, right, in whatever internet platform you work on, right? And they just talk about that versus, for example, if you were like pushing a big change in technology, like really talk about the adoption of the technology, right? Like that is really the metric that I want to learn about and know versus how many people open your email, right? So those are the type of things that to me make a difference, right? When people are telling the story, like what are really the things that they're paying attention to?
Yes, agreed. And I also think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I do think that for people who will read our portfolio, they also need to recognize that what we are doing rings a bell to them, that it's something that they are dealing with right now. For instance, if we talk about digital transformation with internal communication, if I put an example like that, like a situation that I have been before, he will talk to them as well because it's something that they are facing. So I also think that when we read the job description, there is always a few elements that we can use to also create our own story. It's what I did for my portfolio. I don't know if it's always the right approach, but what do you think? What the strong case study we should prioritize, what we can actually translate well in our portfolio? What do you recommend?
I think that it's extremely important, and it has to do a little bit with, and sorry, I'm going to talk a little bit about comps jobs here because I think it plays a
Yes.
huge role, right? Like, how do you prepare for your interview, right? Or when you're like applying for a role. And I always say, and people laugh at me, but it's true. You need to find who's the person hiring, what does the team look like,
Yes.
and become a stalker. You need to
Oh,
like
yes, absolutely.
research and go
Absolutely.
look at the website, read about the company. What are they going through? Like, what do they describe in the job description? Go through the timeline of whoever you find that is related to the company and see what they're talking about. What are they celebrating? What are they complaining about? What are the things that are
Yes.
important to them? And that way you can be 100% more successful because you're, as you said, like you're gonna be touching in something that is relevant to that person in particular,
Yes.
right? And you're gonna be speaking their language, and that's what you want to do. So what I always recommend, right? And people normally ask me this question is like, how many examples of work do I need to have? And I'm like,
Yes.
really, you don't need a
This
lot.
is a tricky question. No, you don't need a lot. I agree.
Need a lot. Like people don't have time to go through
Yes.
10, 15 different examples. What they're really looking again for is to understand how you think. So to that point, right? And just like with your resume, you're supposed to have foundational documents, right? So you have a very strong resume, a very strong cover letter, a very strong set of three, four examples of, for example,
Yeah.
one change management process, one employee engagement, maybe one crisis, and one, I don't know, a rollout of an important enterprise initiative. And then
Different initiative that shows a global spectrum and
exactly.
shows your global vision.
And then when you do that research and see what people are focusing on or what their urgencies are, right, you're going to identify, okay, this is a change management thing that they're going through. So I'm going to start with giving context and try to frame it in a way that it's going to speak to them. And of course, this is a silly example, but I read about what you're doing in this space, and this is how I would go about it because I did it before, right? And
Yes.
I did it in this context. Boom, boom. Describe what you did, and then how you thought about it, and then talk about the work that you did. Have that foundation ready, but then tweak the beginning. Like that's is really what it's gonna catch the attention. And again, just like with a resume, they're gonna start reading. They're gonna read the first paragraph, and if you didn't catch their attention, then
Yes.
they're not gonna continue to read. Like that happens with every single document. So you just need to be very. You have to have a hook at the beginning of each of your artifacts or your examples of work, so that you catch their attention. And to that point, I think you're spot on. Like you have to do that research. You have to speak to them and not about yourself. You need to talk about them.
Yes. I like the fact that we need to talk about them because maybe we think that the portfolio is just about us and our work previously or current, but it's not just that. It's also how we can show to the company hiring manager that we are the people who can solve their problem, either because we did in the past or because we know the approach. So it's something that we really need to keep in mind. I'm glad that you said that we need a 3-4 example because my portfolio is literally like that. 3-4 strong example from the past where I try to explain the story, the strategy, the context, and explain that I am the problem solver and try to also write a good hook because it's like a post on LinkedIn or a CV. If it's not attractive, if it's not eye-catching, they have ton of other documents to read, especially now in this market. So it needs to be very attractive, something that really catch their eyes. So AI can help on that just to brainstorm, to make sure what we say is impactful or not. Yes, I like this. And I want to ask you, it might seems like a silly question, but I struggled with that when I was thinking about building my portfolio because I didn't know what kind of tool or format I can use to make a portfolio clear and professional and something that I can use and update very easy and free. I don't need to pay a monthly subscription. So I would like to ask you, do you have any recommendation on tools, format that the community can use to create their portfolio?
You said free. So that's where it's
Yeah,
tricky, right?
I know.
I don't think it has to be anything fancy, to be honest. A lot of people, unless that you're in the creative space where you really need to showcase the look and feel of a document,
Yes.
like visualization, imagery, brand at the end of the day. I don't think internal communicators should like really focus on something too flashy.
Yeah,
Uh,
agreed.
and a lot of times, like a very simple document, either in Google Docs or Pages or Microsoft Word, should do it. I always recommend exporting to a PDF and uploading somewhere so people can download it and things are not just circling around. Like that's just a pet peeve I have. So I think that is something to consider right now. Excuse me. There's a tool, and this is not sponsored or anything, but I just really like it. It's called Journal Portfolio.
Okay.
It's a platform that it's really for journalists to showcase their work. And it's very easy to use. My website is built in Journal Portfolio. And it has
Okay.
that setting, right? Like where you can just bring everything in there and it's very easy to drag and drop. It's a paid platform though, so that's why I want to have that caveat. But I just really enjoy it. I think it's very easy to navigate and connect to your server and your URL if you have it. I actually recommend if you can invest some money in this type of things, and it's not a lot, right? Like I would recommend that you get your own URL and have a place where you can just go and drop your things and have them publicly available
Yeah.
because people will just you're stalking them, they will stalk you. The better to own that narrative like anything else, right?
Yes.
You don't want them to just put your name out and have them show whatever, right? It's better if you position yourself and hopefully when they search for your name, your website is going to pop up or your LinkedIn profile. So that's why, and that's a whole different story there in terms of like personal brand out there. But I think that if people can and have the opportunity to invest some money in purchasing a URL, creating their own website, and maintaining a personal brand out there that it's owned by you and not just the things that your previous employers or your company has out there, I would strongly recommend that.
I like it. I like the suggestion. After this chat, I will have a look because I didn't know it. So it's super interesting. And you mentioned something that maybe we cannot have when we use free tools, like being appearing in the Google search. If people Google your name, they will find probably your LinkedIn and also your website will pop up. So I find it very interesting and strategic for people who are applying for jobs. So thank you for that. And if I can share about free tools that I use for my site, for instance, I create my portfolio on Notion. I have the free version and I link the Notion to my Linktree, where I also post the video that I host with Markham Grid, my CV and everything. But as we were mentioning, Linktree for free, I'm not referencing on Google. So when people tap my name, they will just find my LinkedIn, not my Linktree. So that's why I always try to post in on my LinkedIn for visibility, but it's not like a website where you will find it naturally, organically over Google. So I think it's good to have both options, but yes, if we want something to work for us to be permanently visible and accessible, I think maybe worth to invest a few money to have this opportunity and to be found online.
And
I think it's, yeah,
And I think, sorry to interrupt that, I think it's
not
super
at all.
important for, especially for internal communicators, because one of the things that people always tell me is, but all my work lives in the internet. Like there, if you look, a lot of
Yes,
work that I've done is not going to pop up on Google. And that's the main advantage that people that do external comms, executive communications, media relations, they can always bring things that are in the public, but internal communicators don't have that. So the question there is like, how do you own that story, right? So you can
yes.
bring things that you've done. And again, I'm not saying here just grab whatever you did internally and just post it out. No, you have to be strategic about it. You have to be careful. So strip the work down to its bones, right? Like eliminate logos, names of companies, real data, right? That can be sensitive, and instead focus on recreating that work and talk about the problem, right? The audience, the logic that you followed.
Yes.
What is your philosophy of work, right? So it's more like a case study, right? And I'm sure a lot of people have worked on those. If you applied for awards or you've done like, if you participate in communities like PRSA, IABC, Gardner, they always have these case studies and case summaries where you can write the story, right, in the way that can be relatable to anybody. And that's the other important part for internal communicators is that a lot of the things that happen internally are only relevant to the people that are in that company. So if you tell the story outside, like it's not going to have the same impact because people are just
No,
going to understand what you're talking about. So you need to make it relevant, right, to other audiences.
to adapt.
And the way of doing that is just to focus on the business problem because the business problem is going to resonate with way more people than just talking about the specific reality of the company you were working for.
Yes. And does that mean that we need to create a portfolio, a different portfolio, not every time we apply, but for the company that we are very interested? How can we stay general? Like my portfolio is general. I didn't really update it when I was applying, but I try to keep the strategic aspect. So should we try to update it like a CV when we apply to different roles? We try to tweak our CV to match with the job description. Should we do the same with portfolio as well?
So I think it's a little bit of what I was saying before, right? It's if you're gonna have this external presence that it's gonna be out there and people can access it on demand, right? That's where you need to be more generic.
Okay.
And I think, where you can bring there is change moments, right? Like maybe focus on a reorg that you supported or a leadership transition, launching a new strategy, a cultural reset for the company, or a big crisis that you had internally. I always, and some of the things that I tell about, right? Everybody went through COVID. I was part of
Yes.
the team that supported COVID communications and when the vaccine rollout happened. So that's one of my stories, right? And then I talk about the challenges and stuff, right? I have a story about when I worked in mining. a crisis situation with a stoppage, right, where people took over the facility and the union was protesting against the company. And we had to do just find those big moments in your career, right, where you can go and tell the story and people are going to be hooked. It's like interesting. I also participated in presidential visits, right, both in Chile and here in the US to facilities where I was working at. And those are things that require a lot of coordination, influence, trade-offs, problems that showed up at the very last minute.
Yeah.
And those are the type of things that you can talk about, right? Not just the execution. And when you have those big moments, like big examples that things that you've done, when you're more specific, right, and you're applying to a specific company, you can, and based in your research, like what you found out, like what could be a good thing. For example, if you find out, and again, this is an example, like if you find out a company recently changed CEO, right? And they're still going through that. Maybe you talk about when you supported a leadership transition, right? Or a cultural reset that comes a lot with new leadership, right? Or a new strategy. And then you frame it that way. For example, your company is going now through a leadership thing. So I think it's relevant for me to talk about how I deal with those situations.
Yes.
For example,
Yes.
it's something I did, blah, blah, blah. And then you use the foundational document that you have, but make it more specific at the top level, right? Where people, when it's going to land. So people from the very beginning know that you're talking to them directly more than just something generic.
Yes, and I think as a hiring manager, I think they want to feel reassuring. Okay, we are not part of their company, but we understand the problem that they have been through, the situation, and I think it's reassuring for a hiring manager to have a potential candidate who understands, who can bring solution, and who can have another opinion because it's something that this person experienced in the past. So I think that's why having a portfolio in communication is such a huge asset. And it's also lead to my other question for you, because again, as a hiring manager, how do you see the fact that a candidate has a portfolio? How do stronger portfolio change the dynamic of interview and hiring conversation? When you have a candidate with a portfolio and another with nothing, just his CV, motivate later, LinkedIn, what do you think about it? What is the dynamic that you are having when you see those kind of two different profiles?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? Everything in life. There are some job applications that require a portfolio or examples of your work, right,
Yes.
at the very beginning as part of the application. They require your resume, your cover letter, and then examples of work. Like that happens. So if that's the case, it's expected by the hiring manager and the team that you're going to submit something. Right? It's
Yes.
table stakes. They require your resume, and then it's like just your resume, and especially if you do it through Easy Apply on LinkedIn, right? It's just your resume, your name, and
Yes.
answer a couple questions, and that's it. Like they're not expecting anything else. But very likely, if you make it to the interview process, right, then, and if they like you, I found that normally when you go into the second interview, like they will ask, do you have any examples of work that you can
Very true.
provide? And that's what, as part of your thank you letter or, the follow-up that you have,
Yes.
then you submit some examples of work. So three very different situations, right? So
Yes.
where it's table stakes, I'm not going to talk about because again, like if you don't submit something, it's a deal breaker. So you have to be ready for that.
Yeah, I like your three example. I used one of them during my previous application. As you say, after the second interview with a hiring manager, I send a follow-up email like I always do. And because I know this market is tough, insane, with a lot of candidates, I wanted to make the difference. I wanted the hiring manager to remember me. So when I send my thank you follow-up email, I also insert the link of my portfolio, trying to connect with what the hiring manager mentioned during our interview and say, in case here is my portfolio where I have been through a similar situation when I was doing HYI. And this always works, to be honest. Even when I was not accepted for a job, the HR or hiring manager always told me that having my portfolio made them to understand better what I was doing before, how I'm working, my personality at some point, and this was a big asset. So I will also encourage candidates after a second interview to always share their portfolio, even if they don't ask, but at least to share and to see if they can connect your work with the business problems they try to solve and to remember your name.
Yeah,
I think it's something great to do.
absolutely. And that's what I was going to say, especially when it comes out in conversations, right? And even
Yes,
if you talk about specific things of your work, and I think this is where, excuse me, portfolios can really change the dynamic of an interview, is that when you know exactly what examples of your work you're going to give, it's going to be easier for you to answer any questions that are going to happen.
true.
And you have to be prepared to answer questions about reorgs, crisis, change management, dealing with leadership conflicts, influencing, like all of that are things that happen in internal communications. And you have to be ready to provide examples of how you've dealt with those things, right? So when you have
Yes,
a portfolio, you know exactly what you're going to bring to the table, right? So it's part of your preparation. So then, when you follow up, and I would always recommend that you follow up with a thank you note. Like I know that some people, just like with cover letters, is I don't know about that. I think you should always follow up.
yes, agree.
Note. And I encourage also hiring managers to reply when you send them a thank you note, like at least acknowledge that you receive it because a lot of people don't do that. So it's just courtesy, right? But you should send a note following up. And then you said, hey, as we talked or as we discussed
Yes.
about this, and when we talked about this specific thing, here is what I did, right? And this is what I was talking about, right? When I told you. And then you link to that example. And in case that you want to learn more about the way I think about these processes, for example, it's always good to have that proof. And again, it's just a matter of staying ready versus getting ready. If you have a
Yes.
portfolio with all the things, that you're proud about, it's like your bragging book, right? All the things
Yeah.
that you're proud about, and you know exactly what you're going to be talking about. That is going to serve you in conversations, in interviews, in applications. It's going to be way faster, right? Instead, if you just wait to have the conversation and then prepare, it's going to require more work. Your thank you letter is going to be delayed. It's going to require a lot of digging for you, preparing your things. So it's just a matter of like having that emergency backpack where you can just pull things out and use them quickly.
Yes, and you share a very precious tips that I never realized before, but now that you say it loud, it makes total sense. Like sending LinkedIn our portfolio to a business problem or something that the hiring manager said during the conversation, help us to have a more, I wouldn't say more control, but to know better what the conversation is going. It's not just a conversation from the hiring manager or different people involved in the process, but it's also a conversation that we can manage and we can have an idea about the question that they will ask us. And I find it less stressful because most of the time we jump in interview, we have an idea, but we don't really specifically know what they are gonna ask. And I think with the way to send the portfolio, I think it's more balanced and maybe less stressful, and maybe the fact that we also have a word to say about the interview, that we know what we are talking about because it's something that we experienced in the past. I think it can really help a candidate to have a strong narrative speech during this phase. So thank you for that. It's something that I will keep in mind.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. Before we end up this conversation, I have two last questions that I would like to ask you. One is about the community that you lead on LinkedIn, Comes a Job. It's how I connect with you. When I was looking for a job, I find that you created those community in the one in general and different community across the world. And I would like to ask you, I find it very amazing. I think it's helped a lot of people to have more visibility about the job market in their region. So I would like to ask, how have you seen candidates use their portfolio effectively in networking and not just application? With this community, is it something that you notice?
So I comms jobs, it's really very broad because it brings together corporate communicators, right? And
Yes.
that involves people in media relations, executive comms, product communications, internal comms, right? Employee engagement, change management. There's just a lot of different areas of expertise. And I realized that when people are connecting and they talk about things, definitely the people that have more information in the public, like things that are accessible there and they have a stronger personal brand out there, it's easier for them to tell stories and engage with folks and really catch the attention of others.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's why internal communicators like fall a little behind there because I've worked most of my career in internal comms, and that's what happens. You hide behind the fact that, ooh, nothing that you've done is out there, so I can't talk about it. And that needs to change. So I
Yeah.
feel like having that portfolio that it's more generic, redacted, and suitable for like public consumption can really be a driver of more connections because you have more conversation starters, stories that you can tell, and things that you can bring to that can bring value to others. And I really enjoy, for example, a community called Ecology, right? That community is really focused on internal communicators. And one of the things that I love the most about that community, which is closed, you have to pay a membership, so it's not out there. But I love to see how communicators, internal communicators, are so free there to share with others and find communicators that understand exactly what they're going through. So I think creating something similar like that that can be more out there where people really talk more about the challenges and the criticality of having a strong internal communications teams, right, is extremely needed because I've seen it, right? When people have that environment where it's safe to share, speak, and collaborate with each other, it's so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I
definitely
agree.
that, it's something that is going to enable you to have better conversations with whoever you're talking to.
Yes, and maybe the possibility to identify ourselves better to what other people are being through and to support each other in this journey. I'm
Uh,
thinking about that.
I always
Yeah.
think that internal communications is probably the one of the areas of expertise in communications that it's where there's a lot of loneliness because in a lot of
I was about to say the same.
yeah,
Yes.
in a lot of companies, there's just
Yeah.
one person doing internal comms, or it's a small team and it's disintegrated across different functions, so they don't really talk to
Yes.
each other much. And it can be very difficult, especially for the same reason that people are not comfortable talking about the things that they're doing. So you can't really find a lot of things out there, examples, cases and stuff. And that's why like finding a community where people can collaborate and learn from each other is so.
Yes. Yeah, it really resonates a lot when I started to take LinkedIn more seriously 1 year ago. It's exactly the reflection that I had in my mind. Like, how can I speak with people who are doing the same job than me? Where can I find example? How can I contribute and support? Was something that I miss a lot at the beginning. So it's great that you can share those resources for folks. I think yes, being part of a community, exchanging tips, exchanging ideas, support each other, this can help in this sometimes very isolated journey in internal comms. So
Yeah,
thank you for that.
I really think that a critical part of networking, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
think that it's what do I get from others? That is networking. But it's absolutely the opposite. It's what you can give others that it's going to give
Yes.
you an advantage, right? And a better positioning. So be generous with your knowledge. And if you have, again, these more generic use cases and and stories that you can tell, it's going to make it even easier for you to offer that value to others. And again, for example, if you're looking to build your presence in LinkedIn and be more out there, having a portfolio and examples of things that you can talk about, it's going to make it way easier for you to create content,
Yes.
things that are relatable, or even chime in
True.
if you're not feeling comfortable about creating your own content just yet. Even feel comfortable to comment on others people's content and share your perspective there. So it's just, again, having that repository, right, of information that you can pull and use as you see fit.
Yes, absolutely. I have a last one question, and I think it will be our final words. If one of our peers in internal communication could do just one thing this month to prepare for future opportunities, what should they build or refine in their portfolio, according to you?
One thing, build a portfolio.
There's a portfolio, yes.
No, I think the most important thing that someone can do if you listen to this conversation is just go sit down, right? And think about the moments that you're the most proud of, right? Throughout your career. What are things that you're like, damn, like that was good, right? Like that was a really great project. And put pen to paper. Write it in a way that it's engaging, it's clear, it's honest. And don't think about making it too polished. Like just tell the story how you will tell it to your friends, to your family. Because it's not bragging, it's just really something that you're proud of, right? And when you have that, then think about the next one, and maybe pick three, right? And then make it more structured and focus on telling the story in a way that it's really going to focus on the value that the work that you're very proud of brought to the business that you were supporting at the time, and start from there. That is the most simple thing that you can have. One thing that I use a lot, and I don't call it journaling because it's not journaling. Like I just write things a lot. Like I just have, it's not organized. That's why it's not journaling, but it's just like ideas, things that are out there, and I have a Google Doc that goes forever, right? And there's just stuff that I just think about. And that's what you need. You need to have something that you can use as a resource. So be intentional about it. Like after this, if you don't have a portfolio just yet, go sit down and think about the work that you're most proud of and tell a story about it. And then start using that to create your portfolio. I think that's the most important thing.
Yes, I love that. When you were explaining what is the most important things to do in my mind, I was like, yes, creating the portfolio and tell the story. If I was speaking to someone, a colleague, a friend, whatever, but just to say the story, explain everything, and keep this strategic part somewhere in your mind, but just do it.
Because a lot of the work that we do as internal communicators, it can be very complicated, not really something that people will read about. But think about it in a way that a story always has to have the hero, the villain, the
That's true.
tension. Like, how do you tell the story in a way that it's gonna be like, wow, like that was fun? Because the work that we do can be fun. It's just a matter of how you tell it and how things happen. And again, I think a lot of those hooks and the things that you can bring to the table happen in those moments when there were disagreements, when there were two areas of the business that were not talking to each other, or you were brought into the room at the very last minute, or someone pushed an email before it was supposed to go out. Those are the type of things that you're like, wow, like will catch and add attention to the story, and then you
Immediately.
and become the hero of the story, right? So try to
Yes.
think about it in that way. Be entertaining, be intentional about how you tell that story in a way that it's going to be memorable for people.
Love that. Thank you so much, Daniel. Is it your last word, or you have something else to share with the community?
I would just double down and add what I said before. Be generous with your knowledge. I think
Yes.
the more you tell your story and the things that you know, the easier it's going to be for you to explain the value that you bring. Like it's a muscle, right? So if you're more out there, if you have that backpack ready to just carry with you and tell the stories, it's really going to make a difference in the way that you interact with everyone. So think about like how you can bring value to others, especially in the internal communication space, and be generous with that. Be intentional about sharing and collaborating in conversations and be part of communities, because I think that's how relationships start, right?
Yes.
And if we complain about internal communications being a very lonely place, it's because we've made it that by gatekeeping things and be like afraid of going out there because this is not supposed to be discussed externally. And I think that's our own fault. So I would encourage people to be a little more willing to share, again, with the caveats that you have, but it can be done and it should be done so that we can all benefit from it and be better at what we do.
Absolutely. This remember me a post I created years ago when I was complaining about why in-house communicators were not sharing anything on LinkedIn, something not private, obviously. But for the same reason you say, like we needed to be more generous, more intentional, and realize that we share for the community, we share for the next generation coming into our field, and we share also for ourselves to feel less alone, to get idea about what is working for others, and just to share knowledge like others feel like sales, marketing, even legal do. And I completely agree. I think if we are a quote unquote isolated function, it's because we decided. So it's also our responsibility to tweak it and to make it something more empathic, more open, and not being afraid to share. There is no right or wrong answer, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to thank you, Daniel, for this conversation and for the very, very great insight you share. I hope people will enjoy it as much as I did. So thank you for that.